Yes, sir, it is visible.
Anyways, so before, okay, very good. Okay, very good. So be interactive. Now, couple of announcements. So if you visit my website, I'll give you the link. If you visit my website, all the slides that we are covering in the class will be made available to you. And these files are going to be all password protected. And the link to these files, link to the page, the course web page, and also the password that we are going to use to protect the files, those are going to be um, those are going to be made available through Teams. Okay. Students, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so somehow there was a network disruption here, because of which I got disconnected. So are all of you here? Let me just have a quick check. Yeah, I think most of you are here already. Yeah, so that's the bad thing, taking classes from home. Anyways, so let us continue. Um, yeah, so let me once again share my slide. Can you see my slide? Is the slide visible?
Sir, we can see your screen, not the slide. We can see Teams.
Happened. Is it visible now?
Yes, sir, now it is visible.
Okay, very good. Okay, so we lost few minutes in the process, so let us continue. Yeah, so far till yesterday, what did we see? We have learned how to build small networks, right? Conceptually, right? There is a whole lot to it, but we have not understood all of these, which will happen during the rest of the semester. But what we have learned is that, how to have small networks like local area networks to be built. Even we started with like two computers, how you can make them talk to each other, and then how you can build bigger networks like local area networks, which will be kind of like private to a particular organization, and then how you can have interconnections beyond these local area networks. So basically, wide area networks, a local area network connecting to a wide area network, two wide area networks connecting to each other, and so on and so forth. So we have seen that sort of scenario yesterday. We have also seen, like, how do we form the topologies, the network topologies, right? So different topologies like the mesh networking topology, the star, the this bus topology, the tree topology, the star topology, and so on and so forth. So we have seen all of these different topologies. So these topologies correspond to how you are going to place the network devices in order to geometrically form the network, so that so it's a kind of a geometric kind of problem where you are concerned about how and where you are going to place the different devices, so that they can form a network of their own. So there is a whole lot to this also, the topologies as well. So which I told you that we will cover when we talk about few other different details. So we are going to revisit it during the semester. But let us continue our conceptual design of the network even further. So we are doing it all conceptually. So let us just think about it, right? So we have seen, like, if you have, for example, a a long bus connection, right? And where you have different terminals dropping into the bus, right? So this will basically help the different computers to talk to each other. However, if you have a bigger network, you need some devices which will intelligently be able to route the packets, which will be able to direct the packets to the intended destination nodes. So basically, the moment you start building larger networks, you will have multiple paths linking the different devices, right? And that makes the scenario complex. So if there is a sender device in the network, in such a network, and the sender wants to send some data or message to the receiver node, then this kind of scenario, the one that I just told you, is not going to help. So what you need in such cases is basically the switched network. In a switched network, you have some intelligent devices called the switches, okay, which will be able to direct the packets or the messages in general towards the intended destination node. Okay, so over here we are going to go through the concept of switched network, and this term will be used quite generically. So there are different types of switches, different nature of switches, and so on. So which will become clearer in the future lectures. So look at this particular figure over here. So this is a this is a typical representation of a switched network. You have different terminals A, B, C, D, etc., and in between you have a fabric of different switches. So when the information, so let us say that A wants to send some information to D, right? So these switches basically help in directing the packets towards D. So this switch basically knows where it has to send the packet to, whether it is going to send to this one or this one, and so once the packet, let us say, comes to either of these, then this one also knows that whether it has to send to this one or directly to this one. So like that actually. So these switches basically can do better than the non-switched kind of scenario that I narrated a while back. Is this clear? Any question on this? So these switches basically can do better than simply connecting the computers through cables, right? So these switches can help in directing the messages towards the intended destination or the intended host. Let us proceed further. Let us try to understand these switched networks. So these switched networks basically can be classified into different types. One is called the circuit switched network. The second is called the packet switched network, and the third one is called the message switched network. Okay, these packet switched networks are more of interest to us in modern day computer networks. These can be again classified into datagram networks and virtual circuit networks. Okay, so we are going to look through each of these different categories to understand what is in scope for each of these different types of networks. Okay, so one thing I would like to mention over here is that in next week's class, basically, I am going to cover something called the layered architecture for the internet, right? In the layered architecture, you will come to know that there are several layers that each of these devices is going to basically conceptually run, right? So each of these devices in the network is going to conceptually run. So how the communication between the different layers takes place across the different devices in the network is something that I'm going to explain in the next class. So these so every device basically has different layers, right? So the network, conceptually, the network has different layers. So there is something called the physical layer, there is something called the data link layer, there is something called the network layer, there is something called the transport layer, there is something called the application layer, right? So like this, actually, there are different types, different layers, each having its own different function. Okay, and there are different protocols that run in each of these different layers. So between the different devices corresponding to these different layers, there are different communications that take place. So this is something that I'm going to cover in the next week's lecture. So what I wanted to mention over here in this context is that these circuit switched, packet switched, message switched, etc., they basically work in the different layers. They do not all belong to the same layer. Okay, so which one belongs to which layer is something that I will tell you in the rest of the lecture today. So let us first start with the very fundamental one, which is called the circuit switched networks. So pay attention over here. So circuit switching, basically, in this technique, the sender and the receiver, they have a dedicated path that is set up. An unbroken dedicated path is set up. So it is very similar to how the telephone networks work. So for example, when you are calling a particular number, right? So before you want to talk to somebody, right? Like, so let us say that you want to talk to your friend. So before you can start talking to your friend, what do? You call his or her number, and only after the other side, the intended receiver receives your call, says an hello, then only you start conversing further, right? You do not simply dial a number and start speaking, right? You do not do that. So first you will have to establish a connection. Only after the connection is set up, then only you start conversing through the channel. So circuit switching basically uses this particular concept for computer networks. So first a connection has to be established in circuit switching. So then once you have the dedicated path existing between both the ends, you start sending the packets through it, the messages through it, and then the connection is terminated. So you see that any kind of routing decision, how the packets are going to be sent, etc., must be made only at the time of establishment of the circuit. And once the circuit is established, no further routing decisions need to be made about how to send the packets to the intended destination node. So you need to have a complete end-to-end path existing between the two nodes before the communication can take place, and the computer that initiates the data transfer must ask for the connection to the destination first, and only after the connection is established, the destination so first the connection has to be established. So you ask for the connection, then the destination node basically has to acknowledge, right, whether it is willing to accept the call or not. Only after that basically the data transfer takes place. So look at the visual over here. So we have a circuit switched network where you see that between the different switches you have links comprising multiple channels, right? So between switch 1 and switch 2, for instance, you have a single link. However, this link is comprised of several channels. So you have several channels of communication between the switch 1 and switch 2. One link, several channels. Same thing for switches 2 and 3. A dedicated link, but several channels. Same thing here, same thing here. So you see that in circuit switching, what I was telling you is that if computer A wants to send some information to M, first it has to establish this dedicated path to M. Only after that the packet transfer can take place. So that's circuit switching. I hope that it is very clear to all of you. What is the advantage? The advantage is that the communication channel, once it is established, it remains dedicated for further communication. So only there is an overhead at the beginning of the communication, and of course there has to be a tear down at the end. So that is the only overhead. So once it is established, you have a dedicated path. There is no other headache that you will have to take in order to send the packets at different instants of time. However, there are few other disadvantages which are quite obvious. So for establishing a connection, sometimes there could be several seconds of delay. Okay, and during that time basically you cannot transfer the data that you intend to send. So the delay basically at the very beginning is incurred in circuit switching techniques. So circuit switching, as it turns out, compared to its counterparts, is more expensive because you need to first have a dedicated path for each connection. So the communication channel basically is not efficiently utilized because the channel is not used when the connected systems are not using it. So what does it mean? So that means that you establish the channel between two devices, and it is not always the case that continuously these two devices are going to exchange data. So during the time that the data is not being exchanged, the connection still remains established between these two devices, which means that you are essentially underutilizing the resources that are blocked between these two devices. So that leads to underutilization and inefficiencies in the communication network performance. Another alternative is something called the message switching. So in message switching, there is no requirement to establish a dedicated path between two stations first, as in the case of circuit switching. There is no such requirement. So whenever a station sends a message, the destination address is appended to the message. The message is then transmitted to the network. And then each node that receives the message in the route, it stores it in its entirety on the disk. Okay, and here actually we are talking about the secondary memory, right? Not the primary memory of the computer. So whichever computer basically receives it, it is going to store in its, let us say the permanent memory, the secondary memory, and then it transmits the message to the next node. So essentially what is happening over here is that this, initially there is no connection establishment like in the case of circuit switching, well and good. However, the packet, which has the destination address appended to the packet or the message, if you call it as a message in this case. So the message basically has a destination address appended to it. So then it is passed on to the next node basically, and the next node basically what it is going to do, it is going to store the entire message temporarily for a certain duration of time, and then it is going to forward further to the next hop node, right? So this is a store and forward network. So it looks like this, that you see that if you have a network like this, right, and A wants to send some messages to H, essentially it could happen that for the same, same application, different messages would be traversing different paths. So this red colored path is traversed by message 1 belonging to a particular application, whereas message 2 passes along a completely different path. So different messages will be flowing across through different paths of the same network in a message switched technique. Okay. So here in message switching, as I said, that every node which receives a message will have to store it in its secondary memory, secondary storage, and then it can it can store for some time, and then it can forward further. So essentially, every node will be delaying the forwarding of the message for some time. So there will be a time delay that will be introduced, okay, in this mechanism. So this is basically how the message switched network looks like. So advantages: channel efficiency can be better than circuit switched networks because you do not really need to have all the messages pass through the same dedicated path. So which basically enables the different other pairs of nodes that want to communicate to share the path, right? But there are few other disadvantages that are going to be incurred. There are many other advantages, but there are few other disadvantages that are going to be incurred. So if we are talking about interactive applications, right? So message switching concept where the different messages will be traversing different paths, they will be incurring different delays. So this sort of thing, if you are talking about like interactive applications cannot basically work on message switching concept, right? For obvious reasons. The second thing is that every computer that receives the message basically stores it for some time, right? So that makes it expensive because you need lots of disk space basically to store different messages, right? So long messages are going to be stored for longer duration of time and using lot of resources of these intermediate nodes that receive the messages. Okay, there is a third alternative which is called packet switching. So circuit switching, dedicated path; message switching, no dedicated path, different messages flowing across through different paths between the sender and the destination nodes. The packet switching basically comes as a solution that combines the advantages of the message switching on one hand and circuit switching on the other. And it basically minimizes the disadvantages of both the message and the circuit switching. So here basically in packet switching, the packets are switched. So what are these packets? These packets are like fixed length messages, fixed length, short, small messages, right? So let us try to understand how these small, short messages are going to flow across. So here actually, as you can see over here, this is a packet switched network where there are small messages like this, which all take different paths as in the case of message switching. But the difference over here is that these are fixed length packets. These are fixed length messages, right? So these are small chunks, and these small chunks can be stored in the primary memory. Okay, these do not really need to be stored in the disks, right? And you can do it, beforehand how long is each chunk, beforehand how long is each chunk. So you can basically plan the storage requirements, the primary storage requirements of these intermediate nodes accordingly. So here basically you have two different approaches. One is called the datagram approach, the other one is called the virtual circuit approach. Okay, so let us look at the datagram and the virtual circuit approaches shortly. So let us before doing that, let us try to understand a little bit further. So here actually the message, as I was telling you, is broken into small chunks which are called as the packets. So each packet is basically tagged with appropriate source and destination messages. Since the packets have a strictly defined maximum length, they can be stored in the main memory instead of the disk, which I was telling you earlier. So thereby basically you can minimize the access delay and minimize the cost that is involved in terms of storage, right? Also the transmission speed between the nodes will be optimized, right? So these are some of these different features of the packet switching approach. Now in packet switching, as I was telling you, that there are two different approaches in packet switching. One is called the datagram approach, the other one is called let us first try to look through. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Am I audible?
Sir, you are audible.
Am I audible? Hello? Someone please confirm.
Sir, you're audible.
Okay, very good. Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you for the confirmation. So let me just go back to okay. So I was talking about like this datagram approach, and there are two approaches in packet switching. One is called the datagram approach, the other one is called the virtual circuit approach. Let us first look at the datagram approach. Right. So in datagram approach is very similar to message switching, right? Very similar. However, here in datagram, each packet is a self-contained unit with complete addressing information. So this basically allows these packets to take a variety of possible paths to the network, which is fine, right? Which is fine, right? So this, because they have their own self-contained, they are self-contained and they have their own address information, they can all take different paths to the network. So even if the different packets have the same destination address, they do not follow the same route, and consequently what is going to happen is these packets, these datagrams are going to arrive out of sequence at the intended destination node. So these different packets, these small chunks, they are all going to arrive at the destination node, in different sequence from the way the sequence in which they were sent. So obviously, if you have to make sense out of the messages that are received, you have to reorder the messages, the packets, you have to reorder the packets, right? So that has to be done by the destination node. And how it will be done? It will be done based on a sequence number that is attached to the packets. So initially, when these different packets are sent at the source node, a particular sequence number is attached to the individual packet. So even if they traverse like different paths, the destination node can basically sequence them back to their original using the sequence number that is attached to them. So it is possible for a packet to be destroyed if one of the nodes on its way is crashed momentarily, right? So thus all its queued packets may be lost in the process, but it doesn't matter because so here actually there are actually different ways in which you can detect like whether a particular packet is lost or not, and then how to recover, right? So there are certain mechanisms which we will learn later on. So now let us look at this diagrammatically, right? So this is how the datagram network basically looks like. So let us say that the source node A wants to send messages to X, right? And so you see that this becomes your datagram network. This becomes your datagram network with different switches in between. So these packets, they come in certain sequence like 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the different sequence numbers of these different packets. So these packets, they all go through different paths, right? Each has its own different address, and at the intended destination node, you see that they arrive out of sequence. So here it was 1, 2, 3, 4. Here it is 1, 4, 3, 2. That's the sequence in which they arrive, right? Now at the intermediate nodes, these intermediate switches, what happens, right? If you look at the table which has the information which is called the routing table, right? So this routing table basically, so in this routing table, if you look at it looks like something like this, right? So the routing table has the destination address and the output port, right? So basically, if the message has to be sent to a particular address, the routing table tells that send the packet through port 1. If the destination address is something different, it will tell you to which port it has to be sent through. So like this, actually, the routing table for all the nodes in the network, it will tell you like, so which port it has to be sent. Now the question is that how do you know? How does the routing table know, like, that this is the port through which it has to be sent, etc. So this basically is done through the process of routing, which you will come to know later on, right? So so this routing table, how to build the routing table, how the routing table is formed, This is something that you will come to know later on. Okay. So for now, this is basically the concept of datagram switching. Now I am skipping this part, but I will let you go through it. So so basically there is a delay, right? So every node basically delays the packet for certain duration of time, which basically adds to the overall delay. The total delay basically, as you can see, right? So the total delay in a datagram network is this much. So these are like timeline diagrams, right? So if you have taken a software engineering course before, which all of you have, the sequence diagrams, right? So this pretty much looks like a sequence diagram. So you see that so the total delay, this is quite visually understandable. The total delay that is incurred by a particular packet is this much. Okay. So I will let you read it. Not everything I'm going to spoon feed on you. So let us now quickly go to the virtual circuit packet switching approach, right? So here in the virtual circuit approach, you need to, it's here actually, it's little interesting, right? So in the datagram approach is akin to the message switching approach. The only difference was that in the datagram approach, you have small chunks, and these small packets that arrive at the intermediate nodes, they are stored temporarily, for a very short duration of time in the primary memory, right? Whereas in the message switching, it used to be like everything used to be stored in the secondary disk, right? So here in virtual circuit switching approach, it is little different, right? So here actually first it adopts the approach that is adopted by this thing by the circuit switching approach, right? So in the circuit switching approach, what did we do? We basically establish the connection first. So here also we are going to do that. So first we have to plan the route. We have to plan the route. So in a virtual circuit switching approach, a pre-planned route is established before any data packets are sent. So exactly like the way we did in the circuit switching approach. So once that connection is established, a sender then can send a call request packet to the receiver, and the receiver sends back an acknowledgement packet called the call accepted packet to the sender. So there are certain conversational parameters that have to be agreed between the receiver and the sender, and these conversational parameters can be something like the maximum packet size, the path to be taken, and other variables necessary to establish and maintain the conversation. Okay. So so in virtual circuits, basically you need acknowledgements, you need flow control, you need error control, so that the virtual circuits can become reliable. And indeed, this is the advantage over the datagram circuit switching approach, because here actually, so you are controlling the flow in the virtual circuit switching approach. You are controlling the flow, you are controlling the error, etc. So that can get in, and so on. So what are these error control, flow control? Again, this is something for a future class, right? So so I'm going to skip this, and let me just conceptually let me show you side by side what is the difference between this datagram approach and virtual circuit switching approach. So this particular figure actually I have taken from Stallings, not from Pharouzan. So please try to understand this. So I forgot to give the credit over here. So anyway, so this I am going to change later on, but try to understand this part, right? So you see that in datagram approach, what is happening? 1, 2, 3. So each of these different chunks, these small packets, they are traversing different paths, and they arrive at the intended destination node. So here actually it's a simplistic scenario that is shown, where the sequence in which these packets are sent is exactly the sequence in which they are all received. This is fine, right? But it may not happen. This may not happen. So the sequencing will have to be done with the help of the sequence number in the datagram approach. However, in the virtual circuit approach, you see the first the dedicated connection to the intended destination node has to be established, which was not the case with the datagram approach. So this is the dedicated part, that one in the dashed line. So this shows the dedicated path, and then only after it is established, the packets are sent through that particular path, right? So how is it done? So the question is that how is it done? How these packets, so how they are going to be sent through these intermediate nodes. So, so for this, we need to understand something called the virtual circuit identifier. We need to understand that there is a concept of virtual circuit identifier. So these virtual circuits, basically, once again, they offer guarantees that the packets sent in this particular sequence will arrive at the intended destination node in the order, in that same sequence in which they are sent. And there won't be any duplications of the packets, there won't be any omissions of the packets, and there won't be any errors with high probability. Of course, you cannot always guarantee error freeness. So there won't be any errors regardless of how they are implemented internally. So in virtual circuit approach, there are two different addresses that are used. One is called the global address, and the other one is called the virtual circuit identifier. Virtual circuit identifier, VCI, right? This is actually this should be VCI. Okay. So anyway, so the global address is this in the virtual circuit networks is used only to create the virtual circuit identifier, right? So global address will help in the creation of the VCI, and this VCI is used in order to actually transfer the data in each of these intermediate nodes, right? How it is done, let us try to understand. So there are three phases. One is the setup phase, the second is the data transfer phase, and the third is the tear down phase. So setup phase, data transfer phase, and the tear down phase. So let us try to understand each of these different phases. So first, the setup phase. So in the setup phase, let us say that we are looking at one of these switches. Let us say that we are looking at one of these switches. So you see that in the setup phase, basically the switch creates an entry for a virtual circuit in that routing table. Okay. So for example, suppose source A needs to create a virtual circuit to B. Source A needs to create some virtual circuit to B, right? So there are two steps that are required, the setup request and the acknowledgement. Okay. So we will understand this shortly. I'll just quickly be back in a minute. Okay. So just give me a moment. Yeah, I'm back. So let me once again put it in the full screen mode. Yeah, so how does the setup work, right? So for this, so we need to understand how it works. So before this, so let us first try to look at each of these different switches. So every switch has some designated ports. So let us say that for this particular switch we have these 3 ports, 1, 2, and 3, right? And so these packets keep coming, right? So the packets keep coming. Where is it here? So the packets keep coming, and these these routing tables basically, and these tables that are stored with the different information. This basically gets populated, right? So this gets populated, right? So you have, so what does it have? So every switch basically has 2 parts. One is the incoming, the other one is the outgoing. For incoming, you have again the port number and the VCI. For the outgoing also, you have the port number and the VCI. Is it clear? So what is this VCI? This is the virtual circuit identifier, which I told you earlier. So this virtual circuit identifier gets created through this global addressing mechanism. So now, so this is how basically the routing table in each of these switches look like, right? So you see that if you look at the first packet that comes in, right? It came through interface 1, the port 1, and it has a VCI of 14. So you see that incoming gets populated. So port 1 VCI 14. So then it has to be sent to through certain port, right? So here as it is specified over here, so this particular packet, it is going to be sent through port 3. It is going to be sent through port 3, and then the VCI corresponding to it is going to be mentioned over here. So this particular packet, 14, basically the VCI initially for the incoming one was 14, which got changed to 22, right? So this is basically the way things work. Here for the 77, the VCI got changed to outgoing, the VCI got changed to 41, right? So let us look a little further. So how does this setup actually work? So initially the setup request is sent. This is, let us say that this is the setup request, right? So the switch 1, basically the switch 1, it gets populated in this manner, right? So it gets populated in this manner, and then so same thing happens for the switch 2, right? So here if you can notice, for the outgoing, the VCI is not it is not set, right? The VCI is not set, right? The same thing happens for the intermediate nodes. So now that setup request finally arrives at the destination B, and then destination B basically, then it assigns a VCI number, a particular VCI number, which is the 77 in this case, right? So then what will happen? The acknowledgement is going to flow backwards. Acknowledgement is going to flow backwards like this. The acknowledgement comes. So VCI B sets the VCI to 77. So now you see that empty space, the empty space in this particular switch corresponding to port 3, that gets populated over here, right? So 77 comes over here. Now that particular acknowledgement flows back, further down, and so here actually, so you see that for the acknowledgement, the 77 VCI gets changed to 22, right? The VCI becomes 22 for the same packet, right? For the same packet. So now, with this 22, it is going to come over here. So now, this one also gets populated. So this is 22, and finally that packet is going to be, the acknowledgement is going to be sent further. It comes to switch 1 with the VCI 66. So this one also gets populated with 66, and finally this packet is delivered to this node A, and the VCI for this one is 14, right? So this is the VCI. So like this actually. So what essentially what did it what happened? Did you notice this? So you see through this setup and acknowledgement process, a global path got set up between a pair of nodes. So between the pair of nodes A and B, through the exchange of these VCIs, a dedicated path gets set up. Understood this? So now let us see that how the transfer will take place, the data transfer, actual data transfer. So now between A and B, the dedicated path has already been established with the help of these VCI, and the corresponding switches, the intermediate switches, got their routing tables populated with the corresponding VCI. Right. So now basically each of these switches, now you see that every switch has its own routing table in this manner with these VCIs populated, port and the VCIs populated through the. So how did it happen? How did the how it got populated? Through the setup acknowledgement phase, right? Through the initial setup acknowledgement phase. So now this is very simple. So let us say that a packet comes like this, which has a VCI of 14, right? So this switch basically looks into its routing table. It knows that this VCI 14 port 1 will be going out through VCI 66 port 3. So port 3 with VCI 66 basically. You should read like this. So the packet that comes in through port 1 having VCI 14 has to go out. By looking into the routing table, it sees that it has to go out through port 3 with VCI 66, right? Because it is intended towards destination B. If it was intended for some other destination node, the VCI would have been different and the port number would have been different, right? Could have been. Let me tell that could have been, because some part of the the entire path could be using the same segment, right? So this VCI could have been different. The port could have been different, right? So it simply looks up into the routing table and it decides like through which port it is going to send and what will be the VCI. So now this packet, you see the same packet, the data part and the VCI number, so the VCI number gets changed once it passes this particular switch. Then it comes to another switch, the exact same process is repeated. Finally, it comes to the last switch, the same process is repeated and the message gets delivered to B with the VCI 77. Right? So finally, the data is transferred and you need to really tear down the connection that was initially made. The call that was established will have to be broken now. Okay. So for this, basically, you need to take help of something called a special type of frame, which is called the tear down request frame. Okay. So this is easier. Okay. So tearing down is easier. It's simply that the resources will have to be released in the tear down process. So destination B responds with a tear down confirmation frame. So initially the source has to send this tear down request to B, right? Destination B basically responds with a confirmation of the tear down, and all switches basically delete the corresponding entries from their tables. This is basically the freeing up of the resources, right? So all the intermediate switches are going to, once they receive the confirmation from B, basically all the switches in between, they are going to delete the corresponding entry from their tables. So what is the delay that is incurred in the virtual circuit approach? So this is the total delay. This is the total delay. You see from A to B passing through two intermediate switches. There is a setup request delay, right? So setup phase, tear down phase, they have their own delays, plus there is a delay that is incurred in the intermediate nodes, right? Because they store the packet briefly, right? So what you have to account for that particular time as well. So from the point the message is from the point the setup is established, setup connection is established or initiated to the completion of the tear down phase, this is the complete delay that will be incurred. So packet switching basically has a lot of advantages. It is cost effective because switching devices do not need massive amount of secondary storage. Packet switching offers improved delay characteristics because there are no long messages in the queue. Packets can be rerouted if there is any problem in between. Okay, so some link is disabled, or some node is broken, or some node is busy for some reason or whatever. So the advantage of packet switching is that many network users can share the same channel at the same time. So that basically improves the overall resource efficiency, overall utilization of the resources, the efficiency of the utilization of the resources gets improved through packet switching approach. There are some disadvantages too. Protocols for packet switching are typically more complex. It can add some initial costs in implementation, right? So much of logic is there, right? So you need to implement those. So for implementation, basically, there will be some cost that will be involved in all of different types, costs of all different types, right? So will be involved. So if the packet is lost, the sender needs to retransmit the data. Another disadvantage is that the packet switched systems can't deliver the same quality as dedicated circuits in applications requiring very little delay. So you see that if you are talking about like real-time applications which are interactive, etc., you really need to have a complete dedicated path, right? So for that, basically circuit switching based approaches, those are more beneficial, right? So these are some of these different disadvantages of the packet switching approach. So I have also given a couple of more slides for you to go through, but I'm not going to go through them myself. So these are actually taken from Stallings again, and this is given to you for you to really convince yourself about it. Any questions so far? Anyone having any question? Students, are you all attentive? I hope that nobody is doing something else parallelly while being logged on to this particular course. Acha. So कौन बताएगा? Let me now ask questions. Okay, so very quick questions. Orpit Das. Orpit, I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Orpit, you tell me that what is the disadvantage of circuit switching approach?
Sir, it takes time. It can take time to establish.
Establish what? Very good, but establish
to
what? Can you be
establish the path between
the path, the connection, right? So initially,
Yes.
path, the connection establishment takes time. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Orpit. Now, next question I will ask to Esha. Esha?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the question to you is that what is a virtual circuit identifier?
And it tells you which port to send the data into for a specific data packet.
Not really. Anyone else? You gave a good attempt. This is okay, but you are not quite there yet, right? Anybody else? What is a VCI? Who can tell? Srijan?
Yes, sir.
What is VCI?
So it is a sort of address which is appended to the packet for data transfer in virtual circuit network.
Very good, very good. It's an address. So what is this address doing? So this is not like normal kind of address, right? I mean, it's a normal address, but the thing is that it has a specific purpose, right? So it has a specific purpose. What is it? What is the purpose? Who can tell? GT Bhuvan? Jiti Bhuvan, can you tell? So Jiti Bhuvan is not listening to me. Now let me ask Bhushan Ram. Bhushan Ram. Okay, so excuse me if so because I might be mixing the first name, last name, etc. So I'm just asking in the order it appears in the this thing. So it may not be the way you call yourself, but I'm just trying to use the first one or two names that appears on Teams over here. Okay, so Bhushan Ram, sleep mode. Bhushan Ram is in sleep mode, huh? Now not responding. So in networks, actually, you will come to know there is these nodes going to the sleep mode, right? So Bhushan Ram is doing networks very well. Acha, Debanjan, tell.
Yes, sir. So I think like the port is used for like acknowledgement, something like that. Like you said, when you are sending packets, so like the receiver node is acknowledging that okay, it is receiving something and it is transmitting back.
Yes. So essentially what is happening, you see the emulation of the circuit switching approach kind of thing happens over here, right? Because this through this VCI, the exchange of the VCI, etc., right, during the setup phase, you are kind of establishing a dedicated path between the source and the destination, right? So very good. Okay, so now I have a lot more to cover. Already I'm about 1.5 hours delayed beyond what I had planned. So let us do one thing. So all of you might also be tired. So let us take a quick break of 2 minutes. 2 minutes should be okay, right? So let us take a quick break and let us reassemble here again. Okay, take a quick break. Thank you. Some of the details of transmission, so details of transmission we really need to understand, right? So let us do something. Let us try to understand how the data transfer actually takes place, right? So I already told you at the conceptual level in the previous lectures, first of all, how to form the networks, what are the different types of topologies, and then we looked into like, what are the different possible ways in which if a particular switch receives some information, some data, some message, how it is going to send across. So we have seen like different switching techniques, right? Now, the question is that how this message, each of these messages, how this data, how does the data look like? So actually the data that is passing through, between these different computers, how does it look like, right? So there are different types of. So if you are talking about the communication network, right? If you are talking about the communication network, so you can have different types of signals. You can have two types of signals. You can have two types of signals. You can have an analog signal passing across, or you can have digital signal, right? So you can, in fact, you can have digital data, you can have analog data, and in terms of signal, you can have digital signal, you can have analog signal. So ultimately, if you are thinking about these cables, etc., these cables, whether it is cables or whether it is the air medium for wireless communication. So these media, they are going to carry certain signals. Okay. So how you are going to send these different signals is what we need to really understand. We need to really understand how these signals are going to be sent across. So let us try to first understand the different types of data. So one, as I told you, is the analog data, The other one is the digital data. Analog data basically refers to information that is continuous, right? This, I think, most of you by now, you have done some basic courses so far. So you must be able to know what are the different types of analog data. The same thing for the digital data also. So here actually this data will take some discrete values, discrete states, right? And on the other side, we can have this analog signal and the digital signal. Okay, so analog signal basically looks like, these are like, these analog signals. So so analog signals basically, so I think like a sine wave, for example, is a representation of the analog signal, and digital signals basically in the form of zeros and ones, right? So level 1, level 2. Okay, so digital signals can be sent in that manner, right? So zeros and ones, right? So this is how you are going to send. So level 1 means, like, let us say that low voltage will be level 1 and high voltage could be level 2. Like, let us say 0 volt for 0 and plus 5 volts for let us say 1, and so on. So like that actually this kind of digital signals can be sent across, right? So you have analog signals and you have digital signals. Okay. Now analog signals basically can be even like periodic or non-periodic, etc. So these things basically, whatever you have learned during your physics classes in +2 or even after that, so those kind of concepts basically are required in order to understand the analog signals. So let us not get too much into those, because those are things that you can really understand or you already know, or you can understand on your own. But let us try to understand that in the context of computer networks, how this communication is going to take place. Okay. So if you are talking about two devices, okay, maybe one is a server, the other one is a desktop computer, let us say. So if you are talking about communication between two devices, there are three different types of data flows that can happen. Three different types. One is called the simplex, the second is called the half duplex, and the third one is called the full duplex. So look at the figure in front of you. The first one is the simplex, second one is the half duplex, and the third one is the full duplex. So these three terms you will be encountering quite often in not only this course, but if you take up a career in communication networks, these are the terms that will become the bread and butter for you. These terms you should really understand very, very well. So what is this simplex? So in simplex communication, the sender device sends some message to the destination node along a certain path in a certain direction, right? And this is kind of like a one-way street. It is like a one-way street. So you see that the mainframe computer on this particular in this particular figure, the mainframe computer sends some message to the monitor. Okay, the direction of data, as you can see over here, this is the direction of the data. So this is simplex connection. Okay, you have a unidirectional flow of all the messages coming across, all the data coming across. So this is the unidirectional flow, right? One-way street. So simplex, remember, one-way street. Second is half duplex. What is this half duplex? Half duplex is the most common one that we will all use. So in half duplex, you see that the data transfer can take place in either direction. Okay, through the same channel, through the same link, it can happen bidirectional, but not at the same time. So in other words, if this particular station, let us call it station A, wants to send some data to station B, it can do so, but at the same time station B also cannot send to station A. It is bidirectional, but it cannot be at the same time. Full duplex is what? Full duplex is where there is no constraint on the direction as well as the time, right? So anytime in both directions, these two stations can communicate. That is full duplex communication. Simplex, half duplex, full duplex. So let me tell you that most of the communication networks that we have been encountering so far, or in this particular course, we will be talking about half duplex. Full duplex is possible nowadays, but full duplex is a topic of like advanced research. Okay, so there are a lot of research papers which are talking about full duplex communication, etc., etc. Particularly in wireless, basically, you know, in wireless channels, full duplex communication, etc. But half duplex is more common, right? So and it is traditional. Okay. So let us try to understand a little bit about these digital signals and analog signals. So what are the advantages of digital signals? So let us have a recap. These things actually are quite understandable, but let us have a recap in the context of communication networks. Digital signals can convey information with less noise, distortion, and interference. Advantage. You know, all these noise. So you see when the data basically flows through, when the signals go through a particular channel, right? Due to various reasons, there could be different types of noise, right, which can be induced. Some noises are basically due to the movement of the electrons. Some noises due to the presence of some electronic or some electromagnetic device, right? So there could be noise, distortion, interference from other devices, etc. So those things basically are reduced heavily in the case of digital signals. Okay, so digital signals can convey the information with less noise, distortion, and interference. And in another lecture, we are going to talk more deep into what is this noise, distortion, and interference. Little bit further detail, we are going to have an understanding. So digital circuits can be reproduced easily in mass quantities at relatively low costs. So this is a very, it's an advantage, right? So compared to analog circuits, digital circuits are more reproducible in low costs. Digital signal processing is more flexible because DSP operations can be altered using digitally programmable systems. DSP is more secure. Digital systems are more accurate, and the probability of error occurrence is also reduced. Digital signals can be easily stored on any magnetic material or optical media using different semiconductor chips, and digital signals can be transmitted over long distances. So whatever I read for you, these are some of the different advantages of digital signals, and that is where and that is why digital signals are very popular in communication. However, they do have some disadvantages too. So digital signals require high bandwidth for digital communication when compared to the analog counterpart. If you really have to send some digital signal through the medium, right? So you need to really have these digital signals require higher bandwidth, and this is something actually that needs a little bit more discussion. Okay, so DSP processes, digital signal processing processes, the signals at high speed and comprises more top internal hardware resources. This results in higher power dissipation compared to analog signal processing. So digital signal processing basically releases more or dissipates more energy, more power compared to ASP, analog signal processing. And the processing in digital systems are typically more complex. Okay, so these are the things basically your friends who study in electronics departments, right? They understand these things pretty well. They understand these reasons, etc., because this is what they do, right? So for us, actually, we are simply mentioning over here these advantages, disadvantages, right? The way we have been told. But your friends who have a BTech in electronics, they really understand these things in pretty much, clear way. So again, let us have looked through the advantages of analog signal. That was the digital. This is the analog. So here actually, the analog signals are easier to process. These are best suited for audio transmission, video transmission, because the data over there are also analog, right? So these are best suited for audio and video transmission. They have much higher density and can present more defined information. They use less bandwidth compared to the digital signals. This is very important, and this is something that we'll encounter again. So analog signals will require less bandwidth compared to the digital signals. Okay, and there are a few other different advantages also, right? So for example, they are less sensitive in terms of electrical tolerance. Disadvantages of analog signals: data transmission at long distances may result in undesirable signal disturbances, because there is attenuation, etc. Attenuation means what? The signal strength basically reduces. So analog signals basically are not very advantageous in that sense. And analog signals are prone to generation loss. Analog signals are subject to noise and distortion. Analog signals are generally of lower quality compared to the digital counterparts. So these are some of these different disadvantages. Now, let us try to switch the gear a little bit and have a look at the complete total picture, right? Let us try to understand that a bit. So let us say that we are talking about two friends, right? Alice and Bob. Alice belongs to a particular organization which is called Sky Research, and Bob belongs to another organization which is, let us say, Scientific Books, right? They need to talk to each other. They need to, so Alice wants to send something to Bob, right? So get this picture in your mind, completely ingrained in your mind. So you see what happens. So so this is basically the path that will be taken by the messages that are going to be sent from Alice to Bob. But how? So in between, so let us say that Alice has a local area network like this, which has a switch or whatever. Then the data comes beyond the organization. It comes to a wider area network, okay, belonging to some ISP. Then there is maybe a national ISP like this, so where there is a switched WAN in this manner. And finally, it comes to a smaller ISP closer to Bob, and finally the message gets delivered to the local area network of Bob. Okay, so these are basically the LAN switches. This one and this one are the LAN switches, and these ones are the WAN switches. The R1, R2, R3, etc. All of these R's are basically the routers. So I already told you in the last class, not today, yesterday, that there is a concept of switch, there is a concept of router, and the switch and the router, they basically function in different ways. They are not the same thing, and they function in different layers. So let us try to understand that how this communication is going to take place between Alice and Bob. So for this, our focus today is going to be on something called the physical layer. And as I told you, these different layers I am going to introduce to you in the next lecture next week. So let us try to understand that how this physical layer communication takes place. So the device in Sky Research, all the devices in Sky Research, their physical layers are going to talk to the physical layer of this let us say this particular layer, right? So the physical layer over here, so the physical layers over here, the physical layers over here, the physical layers over here, the physical layer over here, and the physical layer. So all of these physical layers, basically they are going to talk to each other. So what is this physical layer doing? So this physical layer is concerned about the transmission of these signals, whether it is analog or whether it is digital. The physical layer is concerned about it. So our focus, whatever I told you so far, will be on the physical layer, right? So let us try to understand a little bit further. Keep this particular picture in mind while I proceed further. Okay. So few definitions which you need to understand, and if you have a pen and paper handy with you, please note them down. So first definition is about baseband transmission. What is baseband transmission? So baseband transmission implies sending a digital signal over a channel without changing the digital signal to an analog signal. So digital signal will be sent through the channel as a digital signal. So this is called baseband transmission. This is a term that you will be often encountering. So you see that you have a channel over here. So whatever I told you, this computer basically, sends some digital signals. These digital signals will have to transmit through this particular channel as digital signals. You cannot really convert to the analog form. This is called baseband transmission. So two other definitions will come in very handy for you. So the second one, you please note down, I do not have a slide for it. It is called the concept of low pass channel. Okay, so channels can be of two types, right? One is called one is called the low pass channel. One is called the low pass channel. Okay, the other one is called the band pass channel, which which I am going to talk about later on. Okay. So this this low pass channel basically is required for baseband transmission. For baseband transmission, you need to have a low pass channel. Okay, a low pass channel is one with a bandwidth that starts from 0. The bandwidth that starts from 0. Okay, so this basically happens if we have a dedicated medium with a bandwidth constituting only one channel. So for example, the entire bandwidth of a cable connecting two computers in one channel. Okay, so this is basically an example of it. You may also have another example where several computers would be connecting to each other through a bus network, right? Through some bus, basically they will be connecting to each other. They will be communicating with each other, but they will not allow more than two stations to communicate at the same time. Okay, so again we have a low pass channel and we can use it for baseband communication. Okay, so this one I am not going to go too much deep because in this particular course actually we do not want to spend too much of time on the physical layer, right? So here actually because this course is offered from computer science department, our focus is on the higher layers, right? But just so that you have some basic understanding, I am mentioning these things. So this is the low pass channel. So what is the other type of channel? It is called the band pass channel. It is called the band pass channel. So you please note it down. You please write it. So I am dictating. So what is a band pass channel? It is a channel with a bandwidth that does not start from 0. So low pass channel, the bandwidth starts from 0, and in a band pass channel, basically the bandwidth does not start from 0. Okay, so this type of channel is actually more prevalent, more available than the low pass counterpart. Okay, so now we need to really understand that how you are going to have this transmission, okay, through low pass channel, baseband transmission through low pass channel. Okay, so with the help of modulation. Okay, so modulation of a digital signal for transmission on a on a band pass channel. This is what we need to understand through this particular figure. So here actually, if you are talking about a digital signal, what did I tell you? That the digital signal, if it has to go through the band pass channel, there are certain, it cannot be sent simply like that. It cannot be sent simply like that. Okay, so it needs to go through certain processing. Okay, so the input digital signal will first have to be converted to the analog form, right? Then that input analog signal bandwidth, so the inputs in an analog signal will then have to pass through this particular channel, right? And then the same thing goes on all the way up to the recipient, right? So there is the output digital signal like this. So you see through the channel, basically this input digital signal will have to be converted to the analog signal, right? It will have to be modulated, right? So how does this conversion and the modulation basically happen? This is something that so in next couple of lectures basically we are going to talk about, right? So there are different forms of modulation and so on. So this conversion also, how it is going to happen, but we are going to touch very briefly. So for students, basically, let me just tell you something that this particular part, because so we are not covering too much from the physical layer. So physical layer in the book by Faruzan, 5th edition, so this is basically section 3.3.4, 3.3.4 transmission of digital signals. Okay, so this particular section you need to read, okay, and get yourselves convinced. So 3.3.4 transmission of digital signals, okay, from the book by Faruzan, 5th edition. Okay, so now let us try to understand a little bit further. So let us say that so we are required to we have a problem like this, right? So let us say that we have a problem like this. So the question is that what is the required bandwidth of a low pass channel if we need to send 1 Mbps by using baseband transmission? So can someone, without looking at the book, can someone please tell how you are going to approach this problem? So for this, okay, so it is difficult for you unless you already know. It's not expected that you will be able to tell. So that is the reason actually I asked you to read the section 3.3.4. So let me give you a couple of information which will be helpful for you. So I hope that all of you are writing on a piece of paper. So so first thing that you need to know is that the baseband transmission of a digital signal that preserves the shape of the digital signal is possible only if we have a low pass channel with an infinite or very wide bandwidth. So if we are talking about a low pass channel, you can send the digital signal, okay, only if the channel has an infinite bandwidth. So in other words, basically it is not really possible to send the data through a low pass channel. Okay. So for this, basically, you need to do some approximation of the digital signal. Okay, so the digital signal that is coming through, you need to approximate it as an analog signal. Okay, so you need to convert the digital to analog, right? So for this, actually, you need to make certain conversion. So this conversion is basically results in an approximation, because the digital signal, how does it look like? It looks like, up, down, and so on, right? So let me see if I can, I kept some slides for you over here. This is how a digital signal looks like, isn't it? A digital signal basically looks like this. So this is basically, so if you want to encode zeros and ones, right? So this is how the digital signal is going to look like. And there are more sophisticated ones with not just 2 levels, where you can have multiple levels, right, which can be encoded, through which it can be encoded. So for example, 111001 like that, so you can show these things like this. So again, so I don't want to go too much deep into these things, but these different levels of digital signal I am going to touch upon also in another class, right? So that it becomes a little easier for you. Now, so the question, let me see here. So you see that what we need to do is like this. So let us look at a digital signal like this, right? So you see that this digital signal, if you have to send it as an analog signal, what you need to do? You need to approximate it this way. You need to approximate this digital signal in a certain way. Now, if you are talking about a digital signal like this, the closest approximation you are going to do will look like kind of a sine curve, right? And the sine curve, it will have different shapes with different frequencies and different periods depending on the bits that are being transmitted. So you need to do certain approximation. So how this approximation is going to happen? For that there are different approaches that are there. So we are not going to touch upon those approaches too much. But for you, again section 3.3.4 in Fusion 5th edition, please have a look. You try to understand how these approximations can be done in a naive way and in a better way. Okay, so but what I would like to tell you is that if you do a rough approximation, okay, the required bandwidth for transmission is basically, this is a result, it is going to be n by 2, where n is the bit rate. This is a result, but this result, how this approximation is coming, this is again an approximation only. How this approximation is coming, I would urge you to read the book. So the result is the bandwidth is n by 2, where n is the bit rate. Okay, and another result I would also like to mention at this juncture is that in baseband transmission, the required bandwidth is proportional to the bit rate. If we need to send the bits faster, we need more bandwidth. That's all, fair and plain and simple. Okay, so now let us go back and try to try to understand whatever I was doing over here. Now you see that the required bandwidth is n by 2, right, through some approximation. Now the question over here is, what is the required bandwidth of a low pass channel if we need to send 1 Mbps by using baseband transmission? So here actually we are talking about baseband transmission only, right? So baseband transmission we need to do through a low pass channel, right? And we have 1 Mbps. So can somebody tell me, like, what will be the required bandwidth? So what is the data rate? N, what is the value of n? I told you that the required bandwidth is going to be n by 2. That is the result, the final result, right? So what is n? N is the data rate. What is the data rate over here? 1 Mbps. 1 Mbps is the data rate. And I hope that you know these units, right? So Mbps is megabits per second, right? So 1 megabits per second. So now see, look at the answer, right? So the minimum bandwidth through the rough approximation is b equal to n by 2, where n is the bit rate. So if the bit rate is 1 Mbps, so this is going to give you 500 kilohertz as the answer. So the required bandwidth, the minimum bandwidth through the rough approximation mechanism is going to be 500 kilohertz for an 1 Mbps data rate. So we need a low pass channel with frequencies between 0 and 500 kilohertz for the transmission of this, this particular signal. Now there are some better approximation mechanisms that are also there in your book that can be achieved by using the first and the third harmonics with the required bandwidth. So B is going to be not n by 2, but 3n by 2 and 5n by 2. Okay, So n by 2 is the first harmonic. So through better approximation, you can have B equal to 3n by 2, which will be 1.5 megahertz, and 5n by 2, which is going to be 2.5 megahertz. Okay, I know that this part actually is will become confusing to you, but actually, so I don't want to delve too much of time on this. I would urge you to read that particular section which I mentioned thrice today, and then things are going to be somewhat clearer to you, right? But remember that these are like huge topics that your friends in electronics and data communication departments, that they spend a lot of time on, right? So they understand these things pretty much well. Okay, so for us, we are just going through only the very basics that are required for you to proceed further. Okay, so let's go ahead. So we need to have broadband transmission, right? So broadband transmission or modulation basically means that you need to change the digital signal to the analog signal for transmission. Okay, so modulation basically allows us to use a bandpass channel, which I already told you is a channel with a bandwidth that does not start from 0. Low pass channel, the bandwidth basically starts from 0, right? So if you look at the frequencies, it is going to start from 0 to f in a low pass channel, and if you are looking at the frequency range in a band pass channel, it is going to be between f1 to f2, right? So so between two different frequencies, fixed frequencies, not starting from 0, the band pass channel frequencies are going to be, right? So essentially the bandwidth is not going to start from 0. Okay, so now so let us again switch our gears once more. So now let us go back to what I was telling you, that the signal, when it passes through the medium, it does not remain the same. It gets affected by the medium. Okay, so essentially the signal at the source and the signal that is received at the destination through the fixed channel, it's not going to be the same. The signal is going to be affected in different ways. What are these impairments that are going to happen? One is attenuation, the second is distortion, and the third one is noise. These are the different causes of impairment. Attenuation means like the loss of energy. The signal, every signal, a pulse basically contains certain energy. It has certain associated energy. So when that signal travels through a particular medium, it is natural that it loses energy to overcome the resistance that is offered to it while passing through the medium. It is going to lose some energy. So essentially what is going to happen, if the signal strength is going to be lost after traveling for a certain time, you need to boost it up in certain ways. So there are certain devices like repeaters, etc., which can basically help in rejuvenating these signals. So so you need to basically compensate for this loss. You need to compensate for this loss with the help of amplifiers that will amplify the signal, that will increase the strength of the signal. Okay, so to show the loss or gain of energy, the unit that is used is decibels, dB, small d, capital B, decibel. And I think because you have studied physics before, you must be familiar with this term dB, right? So you see that from point 1 to point 2, you have this signal which is transmitted. Now when it arrives at point 2, the signal is attenuated. That means it has lost some of its energy. So now if you let the signal pass further, then basically the information that is encoded in this particular signal, it is going to lose that information. That information is going to be lost. So you need to boost it up with the help of this amplifier. You need to boost it up with the help of this device, which is the amplifier. This amplifier basically from point 2 to point 3, you see if you have an amplifier, this amplifier is going to, again give it some more energy and it is going to come to its original form. Okay. So this is basically the attenuation. Now let us try to understand the term distortion. Distortion means that the signal changes its form or shape. Okay. Now, if you are talking about composite signals, again, this is something that I assume that you already know, or in case you do not know, in your book, it is mentioned what is a composite signal. So, if you are talking about a composite signal like this composite signal can be broken into its different components like this. So, a composite signal is basically comprised of these signal elements like this. Okay? So, these are the different components, signal components like this. Okay. So, this is at the sender. So, this composite signal has its different components at the sender in this form. Now, at the receiver, basically this composite signal, okay, it can get changed to have a different shape or different form, right. So, this composite signal will change its form or shape in this manner. So, now if you again break it into its different components, it is going to be like this. Now, you see the components from the sender and the components from the receiver, if you look at, there is a difference. So, these components are in phase, whereas these components are out of phase. And this is quite visible, right? So, like from your physics, basically physics knowledge, right? So, these components are out of phase. So, you see this composite signal in essence gets distorted at the receiver end in this fashion. So, this is called distortion. Now, what is noise? Noise is some kind of unwanted electrical or electromagnetic energy that degrades the quality of signals and data. So, how it can happen? There are different types: thermal noise, induced noise, crosstalk, impulse, and so on. So, I would urge you to try to understand all these different types, but let me try to understand, explain to you what is this noise. So, unwanted electrical or electromagnetic energy, right? So, you have some additional energy due to whatever, so due to the presence of some other medium, some electromagnetic device, some other medium or whatever, which basically, so if you have a transmitted signal like this passing through the medium in this manner, the noise comes in as a signal. Noise is also a signal, right? So, this noise comes in as a signal and it basically degrades the quality of the signal in this manner. So, if this is the transmitted signal, due to the noise, the signal quality, okay, is changed over here at the receiver end. It is degraded at the receiver end. So, these 4 types of thermal, induced, crosstalk, impulse, I would urge you to understand yourself. So, thermal, let me tell you, thermal is due to the movement of the electrons in the medium, right? So, movement of that is the thermal noise. So, similarly, you have the induced, crosstalk, impulse, which are also like, so one of these is due to the presence of like, electromagnetic devices, etc. So like that, actually all of these different types of noises are there. So you would have to go through them yourself. Okay. Now, okay. So this is so noise basically is some form of impairment. Noise is some form of impairment. Okay, and yeah, so crosstalk basically, I think most of you are already familiar with crosstalk, right? So before I proceed further, I just wanted to touch upon this crosstalk. So crosstalk basically, it happens due to the presence of another medium, right? So if you so if there is a transmission that is going on in one wire and the presence of another wire basically induces this crosstalk. So So one wire basically will act as the sending antenna, and the other one is going to act as the receiving antenna in that case. So that is where this crosstalk basically comes into picture. And impulse noises are basically spikes, etc., right? And induced noises, as I already told you, due to the presence of some other electromagnetic device like motors, appliances, etc. Okay, so this is basically the noise. Now another terminology that you will encounter quite often is called the SNR, signal to noise ratio. It's a very important metric that is used to define the quality of the signal. Because every signal that goes through certain medium is basically vulnerable to getting affected by noise. Now the signal to noise ratio basically indicates the strength of the signal with respect to the strength of the noise. The strength of the signal with respect to the strength of the power of the noise. Okay, so you see that it's a ratio between the two signal strengths, strength of the signal by the strength of the noise. SNR, signal by noise ratio, signal to noise ratio, and it is usually given in decibels and represented like this, SNR dB. Okay, so it is represented like this. So here you see that if you have a noise, so this leads to a high, so this is a signal, a large, it's a signal, and it is affected by this noise, and how this signal plus noise is going to look like. And here actually you have another signal, and it is getting affected by noise. So how the signal plus noise is going to look like. So this is just a visual representation, but so what what we will be concerned about is not the visual representation, but this ratio, right? So S by signal strength by the noise, right? So S by R, sorry, S by N, right? So that is this ratio that is important. So average signal power by the average noise power is this signal to
Sir, you are not audible.
Okay, got disconnected again, but I think what we will do is we'll stop over here because we have already completed time. The only last thing that I would like to mention is the SNR dB, right? So SNR dB means like SNR in decibels. The formula to calculate this signal to noise ratio in decibels is basically 10 log to the base 10 SNR, right? So 10 log to the base 10 SNR, right? And SNR is average signal power by average noise power. Okay, so this is the formula that is used. Okay, so that's all. Do you have any question, any quick question? Because so we are already over time, but I would still like to see if you have any questions. And there are a lot of other interesting stuff that is coming along. And next class actually we are going to cover those. I know that I am actually quite delayed, but I still didn't want to skip much and want to cover these things in a little bit of detail, so that my intention is that you should feel well equipped at the end of the course with computer networks. Okay, so any question, quick questions? Okay, so if not, so thank you, and please make sure that you start reading the books as well. The slides will be up on my website, and the links are going to be posted on Teams, and these files are all going to be password protected. So the corresponding password is also going to be mentioned on Teams. Okay, so thank you, all the best. See you next week.